Before I start off, I want to talk a little bit about who am I. My name is Mike from Riel, and as some of you might know, I am the lead developer of PHP Documenter, one of two to be exact. I have also done significant work on the Silex framework, mind you, the one with the C, not the S, which is a command line based framework comparable to Silex. And I've contributed to many other projects, including Symfony, Composer, Send Framework, and many others. And I'm the really proud father, or actually foster father, of two lovely dogs. During this presentation, I'm going to cover a few things. Actually, I'm going to start where Dries left off this morning. He's talking about integrating Symfony into Drupal. Well, PHP Documenter nowhere has the scale that Drupal has. If it had, I would have liked some help with it. On the other hand, we already have successfully replaced several components of PHP Documenter with Symfony components, and I want to share with you what my experiences are and what benefits that has given to us. Simply said, is this quote? With this presentation, I intend to inspire you to reduce the amount of code you maintain and use the Symfony components to achieve that. There are two words marked in orange which are very important. Reduce your lines of code and reduce the maintenance of your application. Let's start off with a little introduction to Symfony components. Who of you is already using the Symfony components? A fair amount of people. Who is considering using them in your existing application? Cool? Perfect. And who doesn't believe in the Symfony components? Cool. Okay. I see I've got the perfect audience in front of me. Thank you very much. I'll show you a little demographic or a small list of why you should use those components. For me, for PHP Documenter, I wanted to provide more features, more value, but with less maintenance. We're just two guys, and we're having help from different contributors all over the time, but it's just the two of us. So we're looking for ways how to improve this. And with Symfony components, you actually have perhaps hundreds of people who are actively helping on your project. Perhaps indirectly, but they are assisting you. One of those components, which I shall show you later, is, for example, the console component. We used to have a specific tasks element, which was inspired on Symfony 1 Parquet tasks. And we had to maintain that with all the bugs coming far from it, all the features that were people requesting. And due to replacing that, we have achieved the goals that I'll mention here. Everything's perfectly tested, peer-reviewed, seen by everybody, and I don't have to do a thing about it. Just configure it. This is a listing of all components. I am not going to ask you to memorize them, because I can't even. Fabien has done a great job, and with him all contributors, in providing this value to your application, and to provide an easy path for installation. For my information, who of you is using Composer for your for your projects? Okay. I am going to assume during this presentation that Composer is your default installation method. I am going to show you every pair command along the way, but I'm not going to guarantee that they work. But they should. Right. Having told a little bit about the Symfony components, I'm now going to show you a little bit of the history of PHP Documenter. Because PHP Documenter didn't always start out using Symfony. While that may sound like a bit of heresy, we did. In fact, our first model was rather simple. This was everything there was. We used from the Send framework the Autoloader, the logging module, and which isn't mentioned here, the Send opt get component, if I'm not mistaken. We had a small parser component, reflection bit. That's it. No, not sufficient. The old PHP Documenter assumed that you could do everything during one pass. Well, I don't know who's following the internals mailing list of PHP. There are votes going for separating the process by creating an abstract syntax tree up front. Does everybody know what an abstract syntax tree represents? Well, short explanation, it means you have a solid document that describes the structure of your code, of the thing you want to generate. It can be used as a step in between to make life easier. Well, as time went by, PHP Documenter matured, and we started adding additional components, still no Symfony. Amongst one is the configuration and the addition of writers. This is when we introduced the abstract syntax tree concept. You first generate an XML file, and then the second step of the process actually takes that XML file and generates any artifact that you'd like, be it HTML, PDF, or even a check style template. There was a problem. This was about 1.5 years ago. Red Hat, Debian, all stable releases did not yet ship PHP 5.3. I don't know about you. Well, I run my documentation on a stock server. I'm not trying to configure the thing, I just want to let it work out of the box. Which meant that we were stuck at PHP 5.2.6. And this is actually the main issue why we waited with adopting Symfony, especially Symfony2, since that required 5.3. So we continued building on, adding a transformation element to the package, and abstracting a task component from an application. Still straightforward, and that's when the first Symfony component got introduced. I don't know if any of you have followed the plugins or have seen my presentation at PHP Congress at the time. We have managed to do this by adding the event dispatcher of Symfony 1 into the mix. I don't know if any of you have used a plugin architecture, but this is an easy way to create hooks and add listeners on top. I try not to go too much into depth, there's much more to cover. Well then, hallelujah! PHP 5.3. And this actually helped us in a numerous amount of ways. So we could throw out the old, get in the new, and start using those things that matter. But that was about the time that we were figuring, okay, so with PHP Documenter, and with PHP Documenter we have a basic layer. And every command line application out there has that same layer. What I could do was build the console component directly into PHP Documenter. But after a bit of looking and searching and Googling, I was wondering, can't I do something with a micro framework? Well, and that's when Lucas and I got into a talk. And to be honest, as the top tweet shows, I was considering that framework before that. And he said, why don't you do something like Silex? And then call it Silex. The name's been haunting us ever since. Everybody used to it, uses it, and as you may know, it's a pun on command line interface. That's what a CIL stands for, in the wrong order. So, I said, actually, that's pretty cool. So, we got together, we said, let's do this. Let's create this. He created a repository, 2 months passed, and then I started to work on the conversion of PHP Documenter and had Silex in 1 day. So, it's not the most mature framework, but it works, and we're still building on it. And the core promise of Silex is that you have the console component, and that it wraps around it and provides additional services. For example, autoloading, which, to be honest, is now handled by Composer. In the time, we use the class loader. Based upon Pimple for dependency injection, and the same service provider interface that you might be used by Silex. To be honest, we have a doctrine integration. We have configuration integration. It's all there. You can tag it on just like with Silex. For those of you curious, I've got a small code example. What would a presentation be without code? And you see that the file is loaded, and basically you add the command on the application and you run it. Not much more to it. Cool. So we got Silex. There. We got rid of some of our task stuff. This was a quite invasive refactoring, but what we managed to accomplish was one. We removed our old task stuff. That's about, I think, 200 to 400 lines of code removed from the application. We removed some of the design framework dependencies. Again, it's gone. And that makes us more flexible than we could do. This is the class loader. As I said, the class loader is something which we replaced later on by Composer. Well, I'm still going to show it to you for those who don't use Composer, as it is a great tool to use if you're doing your own autoloading. Basically, it works as a PSL0 compatible autoloader. Anybody not acquainted with PSL0? Cool. So I don't have to get into that. But it's also compatible with pair projects. So it can convert the underscores to a map to the folders. And with the universal class loader, as the class underneath is named, you don't have to do any tricks, anything special. You can use your legacy applications, you can use your new stuff, just mix it together and it works. And installation, I don't even have to say anything. Piece of cake. And this is how you use it. I don't think I have to explain anything about this. This is just the power of the Symfony components. You have a one-liner for installation and 6 lines of code. That's it. You're done. The biggest change for PHP Documenter was the console component. The fun thing is, as I said before, we used Parquet before, or a custom built version, because I couldn't find it in component form. And it worked. We could pass stuff, but it wasn't flawless. It had its bugs. And when we got around to the console component, a whole new world opened. Because it doesn't only provide you with a task system. No, you have a few tasks out of the box. I had written those tasks myself before. Code gone, don't care. But one of the neat things it added, and this is what not everybody might know, is that you have interactive commands. You can provide a scenario. Doctrine uses it, for example. You start your command and you just type away, do this, do that. And that way you can have a sort of command line wizard interface. Quite neat. But what it also adds is that the commands can be easily tested. Even worse, there's a complete documentation section on testing commands. So, to quote Grumpy Programmer, test this shit. It really helps your code. And I'm going to be repetitive here. This is how you install it. To get a little bit into the commands, every command is a task that can be executed. At the top you can see an example where we list which templates are installed for PHP Documenter. Fun thing is you can have options and arguments. I don't think I have to explain in detail what those are. I expect that most of you have used the command line interface. If not, please raise your hand. Well, I expect as much. The fun thing is, what I couldn't do before was have multiple arguments. My system just doesn't support it. I got it for free. The only thing I had to do was refactor my existing code, remove stuff, and free. So this is a slightly more complicated example coming from PHP Documenter itself. Silex adds a little bit of convenience at the cost of a little bit more verbosity, but it's still the same. New application is instantiated. You invoke the command method on your Silex application, providing which command needs to be added, and you run it. The bottom version is without Silex, not much of a difference. Using the application as a center entry point helps you managing your overall complexity of your code. I personally like it. Well, you can skip it if you want to, and do it in a subclass. A command is a little piece of code. Silex is a little bit more convenient, as it may use closures to describe your entire controller, or actually the action within the controller. With Silex, you have to use a command class, because you have these things you can't get around. For example, the name with the namespace. You can't configure that easily with a closure. So that's why we're using the class. And this is the simple version. Let me switch back. This is the Silex version. This is the normal version. These changes are kept minimal on purpose. Should you ever want to go to a complete full-stack framework, to a full-stack Symfony, you can copy-paste your existing commands, make a few adjustments, and just runs out of the box. Again, less maintenance for you. You don't have to rewrite everything if you want to. Okay. Good. Everybody awake? Cool. Then we'll continue to the file set. PHP Documenter has to collect loads of files. You have the option to specify in detail which you want to ignore, which you want to use, which directives need to be passed, which not need to be passed. You have to follow symlinks, you have to ignore hidden directories. That's a whole bunch of options used to collect files. PHP Documenter has got a file set component, which is available on GitHub, by the way, if you want to use it in your own project. We plugged it in, and as you can see in the diagram, it uses the Finder component, also created by Fabian. He does really cool stuff. So this Finder component helps you to find all kinds of files and folders. The only downside is you can't specify files with it. And that's where the file set came in. You can do add file and just stores at the entry for you. But the Finder just adds a domain-specific language. And it's really easy to use. And one of the neatest things is mentioned here below. You can use streams. You can read your files from S3 if you want to. That helps us with file files, for example. PHP Documenter2 has complete support for file, for reading the archive itself and documenting the files in the archive. The Finder enables that. Well, again, being repetitive, these are the installation commands. And this is the actual example. This is taken from the file set component. And you can see a great example of the domain-specific language here, where you specify, I want files from the path with this name. Well, I had to use a filter there because you can specify which extensions you want. I want to toggle whether you can ignore hidden files. And for PHP Documenter, there's a specific filter for the ignore. You can specify which directories to ignore in the Finder itself, but you can specify a glob or a section to ignore. For this, we added our own filter. And now you can say, I want A/B, and then it ignores everything that has that in between, or at the end, or at the beginning. Cool. So, we're on 5.3. We still have the old event dispatcher. We still load the event dispatching composer by inserting the subversion repository directly, causing all kinds of strange issues. So why not move on to Event Dispatcher 2? The new Event Dispatcher by Symfony. It does exactly the same, only just a little bit prettier. Many of you have used the plugin architecture, are probably acquainted with it. What you might not know is that it's rather similar to aspect-oriented programming. With aspect-oriented programming, you can tag on two methods. Same thing you can do here by providing specific hooks. But the neatest thing in the new event dispatcher is probably that it allows you to use event objects, custom event objects. That might have been possible in Event Dispatcher 1, I don't know. Well, this was something discovered in the documentation of the new version, which makes it far more explicit. Instead of calling an event by saying, I want, well, let's go to the next slide, event.log. You now create your event, you pass it to the event dispatcher, and it gets dispatched. Now you can see in the source tree those classes in a specific folder, events, and you don't need to go hunting through the source code for these things. You only have to look up in the directory tree what you want. Another neat thing is this is not the observer pattern. Although it states that in the documentation, it's actually a variant of the observer pattern. And why is that? You can pass state. Observer usually just says, hello, hello, do this. With the event dispatcher, you can add onto the event object what you want to execute in your external location. This is an example, a stock example from the website itself. And here you can see that the listener is provided. You can add it onto it. And at the bottom you see a dispatch. The store order is actually dispatched to the listener. What isn't shown here is that the event object, which is given the order variable, actually passes that along to the listener. And if you use an object for this, you can even change the state of the object. And since everything is passed by semi-reference, it gets sent back automatically. You can do all kinds of neat things. The PHP Documenter uses it in some instances, but it can also be a clusterfuck. So only do this if you're really sure that you want to do this, because it makes debugging a lot harder. This is an example from PHP Documenter itself. For plugins, we have introduced a specific tag at phpDocEvent. This is not an official phpDoc tag. It's an annotation of PHP Documenter, where we say in our listener we want this method to respond to this event. You've got the get subject, which is cool because that loads the calling object. So you don't alone pass state, you can even get the object where it originates from. You do simple add listener call. If you want to do a manual coupling, for example in a subclass where you don't have the automatic behavior of the annotations. And this is an example of how we create an event. and pass a variable, which can be used later on. Well, what we use it for is, for example, to enrich doc blocks. Suppose that you have a specific set of behavior that you want to apply. You use an event, the doc block gets sent over, you do whatever you want with it, and that's what goes in your documentation. So for example, you wanted to do a custom tag and add behavior onto it, for example this tag, you can do all the modification via that parameter. Quite powerful. But as I said, a word of warning, it's dangerous. That's not all, we're not done yet. By now, I think we have deleted 25% of the PHP Documenter source and added more features in the process, which is cool. Deleting code and getting features. Who wouldn't want that? So we thought, we're not done yet. Currently, we generate all templates using XSL. XSL is a bitch. Don't get me wrong, it's great for transformations, but you need the XSL extension, which 90% of the installations don't have by default. I get a lot of complaints about this. And I think it's even worse voodoo than what we write. Cool voodoo, but still voodoo. But why wouldn't we use Twig? Fabian gave us Twig, or actually adopted Twig, made it better, and gave it back to us. And with Twig we have a templating language that is utterly powerful, with which you can do any kind of scanning, structural coding, whatever. And it works. I don't need an extension. I don't need to tell people install this. You just getting some kind of weird composer error? That's because you don't have the XSL extension. No. It works out of the box. So we created a new writer for Twig that instead of XSL uses the Twig template. Cool. So, for those of you that do not know, Twig is originally inspired on Jinja, which is a Python templating engine. If you use Sphinx, you might even use that template created with your Sphinx installation, alter it a bit, and it works in PHP Documenter. It's that easy. And one of the things I like most about it is it's not this arcane code. Who of you has ever tried to do a substring in XSL 1? Lovely, isn't it? Seriously, if you don't use specific PHP methods of interacting between XSL and PHP, you get about yay big of a construct just to do a substring. And an uppercase, UC first, I don't think it's even possible. Might be, but that's even more arcane logic. So, Twig provides us with all kinds of easy stuff. Again, please note the difference in the prefix. This is Twig and not Symfony. And there is Twig project. And this is how we use in the PHP Documenter. But we create an environment. With a file system, we check from your template.xml, where should I get my data from? Which template should I use? And we add a custom extension. PHP Documenter provides utility functions in Twig out of the box. And even better, you can specify in your configuration file additional extensions that you could add. And then we call render. Easy does it. And this is the template. For convenience, I've marked the Twig syntax in orange. This is a lot more concise than XSL. So, what did we learn here? By the way, this is my dog. She's really sweet. During the use, the amount of lines of code you need to maintain. More than 25% was gained during this process. You want that, believe me. Use components because they're cool, and they work, and they're perfect. And why? Because they're built on the shoulder of giants. Don't forget, Fabien has started most of these components with all the knowledge he had from Symfony 1. And Symfony 1 has existed for 5, 6, 7 years-ish. But most of all, it's fucking easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Just use it. And that concludes my presentation.